Welcome back to Point Counterpoint, a mini-series for the Beirut Banyan, co-hosted by Bashshar Haydar and Michael Young. Bashshar Haydar is a professor of philosophy at AUB. Michael Young is a senior editor at Carnegie's Middle East Center and the editor of Diwan, both voices offering nuanced perspective and at times disagreement over select topics. In part 1 of this discussion, we'll cover Trump's victory in U.S. elections and whether or not that means anything in terms of change regarding U.S. policy towards Lebanon. Part 2 will look back at 1982 and if there are parallels between Western support for Joseph Aoun's candidacy and Bachir Gemayel's ascendancy to president-elect prior to his assassination. Part 3 will look at the potential for internal strife and whether or not there are any indications right now for civil unrest given the ongoing Israel-Hezbollah war in Lebanon. And before the discussion begins, if you're enjoying this podcast, please like this episode, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and leave a comment. Engage as much as you can. And if you're listening to the podcast on your preferred platform, please rate and review the Beirut Banyan. And a final point, thanks to everyone who donated to the podcast these past few weeks. I've been interviewed on BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera English, among many other platforms, and I've clipped these interviews on social media via the handle The Beirut Banyan. So thanks to your commitment and allowing me to keep doing this the way I've liked to, completely independent and on my terms. And also thanks to the listeners that have been listening and still tuned in from day one. This podcast is now 6 years old, and I plan on doing it as long as I can. And now, back to the discussion for episode 2 of Point Counterpoint.
The instinctual reaction is, although I dislike Trump intensely, but I'm very happy that he defeated a candidate of an administration which was complicit in mass murder in Gaza. I didn't regret that at all. Beyond the fact that I think that Harris was essentially an invention. They pulled her out of a hat when they realized that Biden was not going to win the election because of his disastrous debate performance. They pulled her out of a hat, they gave her $1 billion, and they said, this is our candidate. And she didn't seem really to have any policies that anyone could identify. And so, I can't say I'm unhappy at all. On top of this, I find that the position the administration took on Gaza and Lebanon was a position that was really very hypocritical, saying that, we're working towards peace, they were not working towards anything. They basically signed off on Israeli policy in Gaza for the past year. They armed them, and they're complicit in this in the mass killing that has taken place in Gaza, and that is still taking place.
And the happiness is that this is a response to that type of policy? Is that where the happiness comes from?
The happiness is that they got screwed. That's my happiness. It's because I think they deserve, and it made me happy to know that in Dearborn, Michigan, basically people did not vote for her because they were not willing to go along with the hypocrisy of the administration, which was claiming that they were trying to do something to limit the number of deaths and the number of casualties. And trying to feed the Palestinians and ensure that they were killed in a humane way. I mean, that's of course from me. So no, I was very happy that in that sense they paid a price for this.
And one more question before we go to Bashshar. I'm pulling from the piece, and it's the next U.S. president is not going to change the Middle East for the better. Came out on the 6th of November. A hypothetical Harris victory. Am I reading your piece accurately that there would have been really no change, no substantive change, whether it's Trump or Harris, vis-a-vis, when we can go narrow, vis-a-vis at least Lebanon?
Yeah, look, I think basically that when it comes to Israel, there is what some people call the deep state. In other words, the national security establishment, the intelligence, the military establishment, has always taken a very pro-Israeli line. And Trump, in his first term, claimed that he was fighting the deep state. But on the issue of the Middle East and of Israel, he went he was in lockstep with the position of the deep state on Israel. So my view is that whether it's Trump or Harris, none of them are really willing or feel a need to challenge the Israeli approach to the conflicts currently taking place, whether it's Gaza or Lebanon. And that's why I said that whether it's one or the other, I don't really see a change. Mm-hmm. Now, Trump has said that he doesn't want new wars, or he wants to end wars. But, I think that that's a bit a campaign slogan. If the war is continuing on the 20th of January, and maybe we'll come back to this, I don't think he will stop it. Mm-hmm. I think that the Israelis will be able to continue the conflict beyond January, because I think that they have a well-prepared plan in Lebanon that goes beyond that date. I could be wrong, but my feeling is that's where we're headed.
So happiness at screwing over the Harris ticket, but there's no respite in U.S. policy.
Yeah, I don't really see that there's going to be a change with regard specifically to the conflicts now taking place. Absolutely.
Bashshar, maybe your instinctual reaction, and we can go the same order, the broader picture, and it narrowing down to Lebanon at the end. What your instinctual reaction is?
Well, I wasn't happy that Trump won the elections, but not for considerations related to the region and Lebanon, because I think it's very unhealthy and very damaging to the stability of liberal democracies. The kind of values that Trump carries with him are not the values that I want to associate with liberal democracies. And now there's a challenge that liberal democracies are facing. Many challenges: the rise of the far right in Europe, and if the U.S. meets that also with a similar kind of movement and attitude, this might be pretty dangerous. I wasn't happy in for that reason mainly, and for the other geopolitical reasons, such as the war in Ukraine. And this fits with the kind of far right, nationalist, anti-liberal standpoint. At the same time, I agree with Michael that Harris did not present a kind of wholesome, politically committed person. She was like an opportunist who just simply happened to be there and trying not to say anything that upsets anybody in her coalition without appearing or at least saying something that we realize there's a person there with political convictions behind that. So as if it's like a rabbit pulled out of a hand, as Michael was
an AI generated.
An AI generated, yeah. So it is. So in a way, the only thing genuine about her was her laugh, in a sense, and the rest was totally, generated.
That's a bad thing if that's the genuine part. That's
So in a way, I think also that, maybe I don't know what the Democratic Party would learn from this. Is it that we have to have a stronger stand against Israel? I doubt that's the lesson there. Or what I would think would be, because I don't think that the election, the way we went, were influenced heavily by this. He won all states, not only Michigan, the swing states. So I don't think this, if they look back at it, they would not say, oh, we should look differently at Middle East to win elections in the future. I don't think this is the lesson they learn. And there's another lesson that they should learn, I think, but maybe they will not learn, is that this kind of illiberal progressive politics, where you push the progressive agenda to an extreme, where you also don't allow, opposing voices. It becomes a dogma that is intolerant dogma. And that kind of push has allowed people like Trump to play the populist card and gain sympathy because of what people have seen. And this progressive liberal agenda, which I, to a great extent, am in favor of, but not to the extent that it has reached recently. And this managed to alienate a lot of people, including people who would have voted democratically, I think, including also immigrants, Latino voters, who voted this time clearly in favor of Trump, more than the last time. So I think they're alienating a lot of people by pushing this kind of progressive liberal agenda too hard and in an intolerable manner. So that's partly what I think the lessons they should learn that I'm not sure they would learn. No? Maybe the division will even deepen, and there will be no reassessment of what has gone wrong. But when it comes to Lebanon and the region,
and let me, before we go to Lebanon, you mentioned at the beginning that you're worried about the liberal order that is under threat with a Trump victory.
Yeah.
Does that also translate to the Middle East, the way you see a liberal order, or do you more or less...
There is no liberal order really in the Middle East. I mean, neither the moderate pro-peace camp these are not liberal orders. These are mainly authoritarian with different degrees of authoritarianship and brutality, but even the ones that are not brutal are still authoritarian, and we can't call them liberal in that sense.
Could I interject one thing? Sorry, Bashshar. But the problem, I can understand where you're coming from, but when today we see Harris as the alternative to this illiberal emergence, which is Trump, I have trouble seeing this. An administration that is basically armed mass murder, conceivably a genocide in Gaza, is not a good defense of the liberal order. In the last year, the liberal states in the global order have basically, given a green light to the Israelis. And I agree with you. I'm not trying to bring everything to the Middle East, but I still think that Gaza has a fundamental meaning in the international order today that transcends. It's not a question of this election or that. Gaza today, at the global level, I think is an important moment in terms of the development of the global order. Everything that we had learned in the last 30, 40 years about the rise of a sort of a rules-based international order, democracy, and all these ideas that came out in the 90s, humanitarian intervention, all these issues to my mind have been collapsed because of Gaza. So for me, I can never conceive of anyone from the Biden administration as representing a virtuous liberal alternative to the unvirtuous Trump. I don't like Trump, but Trump has not, up to now, he may very well do so, but up to now he has not basically overseen an armed mass murder.
Maybe I would like to distinguish two things or separate them. One is the kind of liberal democratic order as it operates in the West, and the behavior of Western countries in outside that domain. And sometimes I think they fail, and this happened more often during the Cold War period. They were supportive of many dictatorships, brutal ones. That doesn't mean that they were not overall defending liberal democracies versus the alternative, which is authoritarian Soviet-type dictatorships. And that's important. Now, of course, how come these kind of liberal democracies fail in defending liberal order, or at least values that they say they claim to defend? That requires a deeper discussion. But it's not a new phenomenon that some of these defenders of freedom and liberty and human rights can themselves be involved in the opposite kind of engagement or direction. But I don't see this now from the point of view of Harris and Trump. I see that not in terms of the way they conduct the wars in the Middle East. I see that in terms of how these values are flourishing or not in their own countries. And then, of course, what links those values to appreciating or working in favor of promoting them outside, or on protecting certain minimal standards of humanitarian.
So you agree with me? It's hypocrisy.
I'd say it's much more complicated than that. It's not hypocrisy, and it's not correct at the same time. It's not that there are no values that guide them, but at the same time, I don't think they are always guided by these values. So that's my position regarding these liberal democracies. They are not perfect, but they are not totally fake.
Sorry, just regarding Lebanon, at least, I may have interrupted you when you were going to say, whether or not you see a nuanced difference between the two, had Harris won, and what Trump will look like for Lebanon.
Yeah, I also maybe disagree a bit with Michael on being happy in the sense that the elections punished Biden administration for standing, for the stand they took in Gaza. First of all, as I said before, it's not the punishment for that. They were not punished for that. They didn't lose the election for this one.
No, I'm giving my reaction.
Yeah. But maybe they deserve it, even though this was not the reason why they lost. So they deserve it. But if you want to look at, would Trump be better for the region and for Lebanon versus Harris? This becomes more complicated. Forget about the damage that Trump might do to liberal democracies. Would it be able to put us in a better position here in the region? And I think some people think, and one might, see that there is something going on there for this kind of claim, that Trump will be harsher on Iran. He'll be less reluctant to push hard against Iran. And if you're one of those people who think that Iran is a major source of the kind of problem we are in, independently of how brutal the Israelis are, or how brutal in Gaza or in Lebanon, if you think that Hamas and Hezbollah operate as proxies for Iran, and that hitting Iran or containing Iran would solve the problem, as many people are saying now, at the source, rather than directing your anger at the mainly helpless civilians, this will be a better way of solving the problems here. If that is Trump's attitude, and this nobody knows, he's very unpredictable, and everybody knows that one of the problem that he's unpredictable. But if that kind of scenario, which is not far-fetched, it's continuation of his attitude towards Iran in his first term, and if he ends up having some people that are being mentioned now to be part of the administration, such as Mike Pompeo and Mark Rubio or Cotton, these people are very hawkish on Iran. If you think, and I'm in favor of that view, that Iran is a major problem, and Iran is preventing us from conducting a meaningful resistance against Israel, rather a destructive one, then that might end up improving things in the region.
There's a paradox there.
And the Democrats might be more reluctant in doing that. So if Israel might push in favor of that in any case, regardless who comes in. But maybe Trump would allow it to be unfold more quickly and more effectively.
But it's interesting, the wrecking ball against this liberal order, at least I hope I'm getting this right, is also potentially a positive thing for Lebanon at the same time. That the overtly anti-Iran positioning comes at the expense of somebody who's, like you said, a bit erratic and unstable. And I hope I understood this right, that you see him as a negative to the U.S., not as a positive.
No, I think this unpredictability is there, and people cannot simply predict and say he will do this and that. But if you want to take his previous behavior and his rhetoric throughout that, it's the anti-Iranian position has been part of his, mantra, part of his repeated position, emphasized one, and he appointed people who can in a way carry that agenda, such as Mike Pompeo. And if he continues on that path, it might be that we end up dealing with one of the sources of the problem, main source of the problem in the region, not only for Palestine and Lebanon, but also for Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and maybe others as well. So in a way, it will create stability of some sort. Now, the damage in Gaza has been done mainly. What are the options open for people in Gaza? It must be kind of stability of some sort, so that people in Gaza can themselves and the West Bank can say, let's formulate a new mode of resistance. If you consider that the Hamas mode of resistance has failed, and I think so. And Hezbollah's mode of resistance has failed. You need a new ways of dealing with this, with the neighbors here. And that one can only happen, in my opinion, if the reach of Iran has been curtailed significantly.
We have the example of 1982 and Bachir Gemayel. And even Bachir Gemayel in 1982 realized very quickly that the fact that he rose to power on an Israeli tank was going to cause him problems within the country. And if you remember, there was this famous meeting in Netanya with Begin, where basically the Israelis wanted to impose a peace treaty on Lebanon. And the meeting didn't go well. And of course, Bashir at the time was basically trying to open up to the Muslim leadership, Sa'ib Islam, and so because he understood that this was not, you could not begin a legitimate presidency by being brought into power by an occupying force. So all I'm saying today is that we have to be cognizant of this example. Of course, Bashir was killed 3 weeks later, so ultimately we don't know how that story would have ended. But today there has been pressure to try to, or reports of pressure, to try to bring Joseph Aoun, or to bring a president to office, but with a preference for Joseph Aoun. And all I was trying to do personally is to warn, you cannot bring in a president today in Lebanon against Hezbollah, which at the same time as Hezbollah is facing a major onslaught by the Israelis. I mean, you're going to create a presidency that fundamentally doesn't have the support of one of the country's major communities. This is all I'm saying. And I think, this is very, for any president of Lebanon, this can be crippling, you see. Now, that's why I prefer that there be some kind of a process to end the fighting and a consensus emerging. Now, having said that, I don't think that we're going to have a consensus at the end of this. I think that what we will have is very probably something imposed on Lebanon at the end of this, because I think the war will continue for many more months with more destruction. And ultimately, what we will have is something, sort of a package deal that will be imposed on us. And Joseph Aoun may very well be the candidate then. However, it will come through an Arab and an international consensus, in the same way almost that Michel Sleiman emerged from the so-called consensus that followed the Doha Agreement, or that prepared the Doha Agreement. It'll be different than basically now telling Nabi Birr you have to hold an election, and we would like our preferences for Joseph Aoun. Having said that, I don't think it would be even possible today to have a quorum if they go to parliament to elect a president.
So the warning signs were really trying to avoid the fate of Bachir Gemayel. That's what I'm understanding. That if you push too hard, there will be a reaction that is consequential. Is that the gist of the point? Because otherwise, I was trying to see where other parallels existed, knowing that Joseph Aoun is not a Bachir Gemayel-like figure, and that the Israelis are not in Lebanon the way they were in 1982, and let alone American involvement is really diminished compared to 40 years ago, at least when it comes to intervention.
Look, I think Joseph Aoun himself is probably smart enough to realize that this is not a way to become president anyway. You're right, there are lots of things missing from 1982. We shouldn't see a direct link. 1982 was a campaign to bring, among the objectives of 1982 was to bring Bashir to power, to have a peace agreement. And ultimately, we didn't have a peace agreement. There was a withdrawal agreement, the May 17th agreement, which was not far from a peace agreement, by the way. But I don't think this is the plan today, and I don't think we're going to go in that direction. The only reason I think ultimately why Joseph Aoun is a favored candidate today is because there is they're going to need some kind of package deal which involves the Lebanese army to try to police whatever arrangement comes out. And the best person who would be able to put this package together and who has legitimacy in this regard would be Joseph Aoun.
Right. Bashshar.
Yeah, I mean, of course, comparing the situation now with 82 is very apt because you have similar, at least, kind of intervention by Israel in an upsetting of the equilibrium that had existed in Lebanon prior to 82 and prior to 2024. So the comparison is apt, although I think there are major differences. In 82, Israel came to a country that had witnessed a war, that has reached a stalemate with defined green lines, and people were sort of okay with the way the country was divided. They knew that this is the what they can get, and it was there kind of stability, a kind of balance between the two powers. Came and disturbed that and hit one side, PLO and their allies, and Syria as well, the Syrian regime, and brought Bachir Gemayel, who was the leading figure in the opposition and a very hawkish leading figure in the opposition, to become the president of the country. It's totally turning on the table on the other side and making one of the sides of the civil war victorious. We don't have the same thing here. Joseph Aoun is not Bachir Gemayel. He is already a compromise figure from the beginning. He's an expression of the situation that was there before he came. He's not a faction to that. He's not even Samir Jaja. So in that sense...
Sorry, just to interrupt. What was the situation like before Bashir's ascendancy? Was there a potential consensus candidate on the horizon then?
No.
Was there any discussion of nothing like that?
No. I mean, there was
a president, but there was no sort of consensus.
There was Sarkis,
yeah.
Right,
but there was no agreement or even a dialogue on who would follow him.
I see.
Yeah, but at least the Israelis brought the main leader, the hawkish leader of one side of the civil war, to rule the country. And Joseph Aoun doesn't represent that, and I think there's also close to this analogy or asymmetry between the two cases. In the previous case, as I said, they brought somebody who was one of the leading of the factions of the civil war sides to rule the country. Here, what you are doing is that already there has been a ruler. Hezbollah was a winner already. There was no winner, no loser before, because it was a stalemate of a civil war, an active civil war, or at least not as boiling as in the early years. Now we reach a situation, Israel is intervening in a country that already had a winner, a clear winner, and many losers, but clear winner. And now what Israel is doing is actually reducing the height of that winner to an extent where it becomes equal to the rest, or more or so equal to the rest. That's the kind of thing. It's not making somebody taller than the others. It's actually leveling the playing field. What Israel is doing now is leveling the playing field without sponsoring, unlike in the case of 82. 82 sponsored a winner. There's nobody sponsored here. Israel is in no dialogue with any of the Lebanese factions. Doesn't even call them, mentions them by name. There is no attempt to even flirt with some of them. It does its business and leaves the Lebanese to figure out how they will manage after the war. So in a way, what you will see is a kind of leveling down. How much leveling down will happen? I don't know, but it will be definitely bringing Hezbollah closer to the power of others. I doubt they will become even weaker than them, because they will still maintain the level of solidarity and strength, but it will not be the discrepancy you had before. So Israel has been leveling down of the playing field, and this has different impact in the sense that, if I want to think of it from the point of view, with this result in something similar to the 82, post-82. In post-82, you bring somebody, you put them who's an adversary, who's the kind of way, the devil for the other side as the leader, and then the others take the opportunity with the help of Syria to turn the table again on them by killing Bachir Gemayel and starting the after the Zaidi withdrawal, the wall in the mountains as well as in the Dahi. But now, what you have now is as I said, leveling the playing field, and who among the parties or the political groups after that who have an incentive to start a civil war or start a.
We'll save that for later.
Okay,
but just if I could squeeze in American policy at the moment, and maybe some comparison. Do you think that, and this is for both of you, but I'll ask you first, Bashshar, that American policy in terms of at least endorsing a Joseph Aoun presidency is the right kind of policy at the moment?
I don't know really this kind of policy, but I don't see him as antagonistic as Bachir Gemayel. It shouldn't be. Maybe Hezbollah wants to maintain power as before, or at least express an image of power. They don't want to give a hint that we are now weak and this is why we are compromising. But I don't see fairly that a Joseph Aoun is another Bachir Gemayel type. There's no way to compare them. It will be only signaling that there is a candidate who you might had before the power to veto because you had the preferred candidate, and now you don't have the power to veto, but he wasn't outside the political spectrum that is acceptable. It's a compromise, and you would think that Hezbollah should be willing to accept a level of compromise after the kind of hit they've been subjected to save their own people and the country. They are not, by accepting Joseph Aoun, surrendering. It's not a surrender.
Do you see it the same way, Michael, and at least in terms of American posturing?
No, I agree with Bashshar on one thing. It's that Hezbollah doesn't want Joseph Aoun because it doesn't want to appear like it's bending to an American diktat or dictates. Look, I think, to be very honest, I think the United States is better staying out of the naming of people. And they haven't. To be fair, the Americans haven't named Joseph Aoun. What they've done is they've met with him, they've leaked that he would be the kind of person they're looking for. But even that, I think, is a very bad idea because all it will do is weaken him. It will make him a point of disagreement between the Americans and Hezbollah. And Hezbollah, if the Americans were to name Sleiman Frangi as their candidate, Hezbollah would hesitate probably to continue to endorse him. The Americans should keep their candidate out of the continued discord between them and Hezbollah. And I agree. I see Joseph Aoun basically ultimately as a compromise candidate because he represents the one institution around which most Lebanese seem to agree. And he actually will probably be he's not a corrupt. I think there's a general agreement he's not corrupt, which I think bothers many members of the political class because they like a corrupt army commander. It's someone they feel they can control. Definitely, if you want someone, if the Americans want someone, they should not suggest or indicate who they want.
And I'll ask one more question for you, Bashshar. Do you think of the imposition scenario as a de facto reality, that he will come in a package deal the way Michael described?
Yeah, possibly, depending on when Hezbollah would think that it's time for them to actually declare some kind of willingness to compromise. Now, in the middle of the battle, any sign of weakness will not be rewarded. They want to be concession when it's rewarded in some way. And it will be concession for the free. And I agree with Michael. And that's not surprising. The US is not good at playing like Lebanese political game. When do you present a name and when do you burn that name when you present? They're not good at that at all. But they see, as Michael also said before, that the only way we can convince the Israelis that this you can actually end the war is to present an army and somebody who seems to have an allegiance to the army and wants to present a strong army, because also can rely on the American support. It can only assure Israel, at least not even that will be enough, but at least it's a necessary step to have somebody in the army who's not who's in the helm of the country, who's not handpicked by Hezbollah. So that would be a necessary, and they can't see anybody who's neither too antagonistic to Hezbollah or too weak on pro-Hezbollah, except Joseph Aoun at this stage. So because the army, as Michael said, was going to play a big role in guaranteeing the agreement, it's the only way out, and this is why they couldn't see anybody. Maybe they proposed the name too soon or not. That's another question. But he's the only candidate so far that can actually be a guarantor, part of the guarantees for the deal to
Maybe
come.
It's getting too narrow, but my understanding of Jaja's own complications is interesting, and that sometimes he seems okay with it, sometimes he doesn't. So I think, yeah, please.
Look, I don't think any of the Christian leaders, I don't think any of the members of the political class want someone like Joseph Aoun. They were willing to accept Michel Sleiman because he was a weaker army commander. But Joseph Aoun is someone who does have a certain measure of credibility. He's also, we have to understand, he's changed the army in a way. I mean, I think he's built up the sort of the elite units. So, he is a more credible figure, and he probably has loyalty in the army that he can use. And if he needs to be backed up, he can use it. And it's this traditional rift in Lebanese politics, which we saw with Fouad Shihab. The political class doesn't like a strong army commander because, of course, A, he's not beholden to them, and B, it's an alternative power structure which they don't control. And so no one will really deep down wants him, which is why I'm saying if they want to impose, if the Americans want, and the French and others want Joseph Aoun, then it's going to come in a package deal where everyone gets something to accept this individual, And as Bashshar is saying, even Hezbollah in a way wants a negotiation, so that if it makes a concession, it can get something out of it.
But I'll just say one thing also. I like the comparison to Fouad Shihab, because that is at a time of intervention, and he was a consensus president, at least in 1958. So I think that's interesting that he was unpopular among the political class. I didn't think of Joseph Aoun carrying the same weight in terms of being able to push
he
back.
doesn't. He doesn't. Not as much as Shihab at the time. Because remember, Shihab was also active in 52 and had at the time, he I think I'm correct in saying in 52 he could have taken power and he hadn't. He had basically said no. I mean, there was credibility there. And within the Maronite community, as you know, there was a big division. And he was not perceived as being on Shamoun's side. So he reassured the Muslim partners in the state. No, we shouldn't, analogies are only useful because they go so far.
Yeah.
But I think in this particular case, no one will admit that they will all say we're with the commander of the army, but deep down, no one really wants the commander of the army. But that doesn't mean that he will not come to power if there is a package deal imposed on Lebanon.
For sure.
I think the same thing applies to maybe Samir Jaja in the sense that he also doesn't want to say I'm against or behind Joseph Aoun, because that would also conceive Joseph Aoun as a candidate for the Lebanese forces. Even if they want him, they will not go out and say that. They will wait till see if this comes out. Then they say, okay, we have our conditions as well. We want certain guarantees that this doesn't turn out into a kind of all powers to the head of the army, and we will become marginalized. Of course, that would be, or they will demand other things internally for them to be also endorsed, Joseph Aoun. I don't think they have a problem with Joseph Aoun because I don't think they are ready to take over given, because otherwise they would look like Bachir Gemayel again. If we move from the current situation to a Lebanese forces president, this requires a transitional period before.
But there is a fear. But we shouldn't forget something. If there is an election, Bashshar, a lot of the Christian parties are worried that Joseph Aoun will have a bloc, could eat away from their blocs. I mean, this is of course a big fear of Jabran Basid, but I think Jaja too.
Yeah.
I mean, the commander of the army and the president are Maronites. I mean, and so there is always this worry among the Maronite politicians that the commander can take votes away from them and power away from them.
They might prefer a weaker candidate than Joseph Aoun, but if given that this is part of a deal to actually end the war and curtail Hezbollah's power, they can live with that, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
I think they can live with that, and because their chance of them being or a weak president being there at the helm is less likely. So I think, but they don't want to go in favor of it until it's materialized, not against it until it materializes. So this is why I think this is the same logic. Yeah,
so
applies.
So in other words, if Jaja were to be in Ba'abda, that would be a 1982 moment. That's more 1982 than Joseph Aoun.
More closer, although it's not the same exactly, but it will be closer to that.
Perceived more like.
But also, you see, in the case of Bashir, what happened is that the Syrian regime decided to turn the table against the legacy of the Azeri invasion, with support of their allies, Amal, Ishtirakiyin, and others. And in that sense, who's going to play that role now? If going to be a coup against the legacy of the war, suppose you have Aoun or Samir Jaja or whoever becomes the president, it must be Iran, because Iran now takes the role of the Syrian regime in the case of Lebanon. And the question, there are too many questions here. First of all, would Iran be there to be able to perform that? And that depends on whether there is a direct confrontation with Iran. The second thing is would Israel stand and watch Hezbollah take over again with the help of Iran, in the same way they stood back and watched Syria take over Lebanon again from Bachir Gemayel and his allies after the Israeli withdrawal? I don't think the Israelis will stay and just simply watch Lebanon going back to the hands of Iran and Hezbollah after this war. So I think if Hezbollah wants to go back and impose its will, and this time it has to be by also showing force, or by use of force, through the support of Iran, it will be resisted more internally to some extent, but it will also be externally watched and not allowed to happen. So I don't think they have it. The dynamic are different in the sense of having a coup against the Israeli achievements here.
There's a piece, Michael, you wrote for Diwan 2 weeks back or so. Is Hezbollah moving in? I enjoyed this piece. It's almost like game theory, seeing all the possible scenarios for civil strife, and then also in a way reassuring the reader that civil strife is unlikely. And even though there's the possibility for things degenerating, I understood from the piece that you're somewhat optimistic for reasons that I think I'd like to explore in the way I see the situation, and that the only credible security threat to Hezbollah is the Lebanese army today. And there is no other organized security opposition to Hezbollah that can actually take the country to civil war. That's the way I've seen the last few years, even prior to October last year, that the chances of civil war are very low for that reason. And if those conditions change, we may well end up in the 1970s again. So I want to start there. Is that really the view that you look through, that you don't see a credible militia-like threat to Hezbollah, and therefore the chances are small?
Yeah, but it's a bit different. Look, we have 1,200,000, apparently, 1,200,000 people, mostly from the Shia community, who are basically in the streets. Okay? This is a catastrophe of monumental proportions. If anyone believes that Hezbollah can organize a civil war, organize attacks, organize itself, arm itself, in the midst of areas which it doesn't control, where most of these displaced are located. I mean, I think we're being a little bit, we're overestimating Hezbollah's strengths. Hezbollah today is a disoriented party. Okay, at the tactical level, it is fighting in South Lebanon. The Iranians are trying to reestablish control and try to calm Hezbollah down. And maybe they'll succeed in this. But I doubt very much, first, that the Iranians want to push Hezbollah into a civil war. This would be a disaster for Hezbollah and for the Shia community. I think at the same time, Hezbollah itself has too much of a mountain to climb with this 1,200,000, 1,300,000 who are basically in dire straits, people who are living in the streets, people who are, who may have money for the next few weeks, not the next few months. This is going to be a tremendous burden on the party. The party needs to resolve this issue before it worries about civil war.
Yeah.
And of course, no one else wants a civil war. And the only way it can resolve this issue, whether it likes it or not, is it needs the Lebanese state on its side. Because only the Lebanese state can bring the amounts of money that are going to be needed. And even then, even the Lebanese state will never bring enough that are needed to take these people back to their villages and show them that there is a process of reconstruction. So, it's such a monumental problem that who is thinking of civil war? Of course, there may be anger. People may say, what's going to happen to Hezbollah? Is it going to break apart? And then, you may have violence. Okay, perhaps you can have sort of contained violence, which is why I said in the pieces, the role of the Lebanese army in this context will be important to control this kind of situation. But do I see a civil war? I don't see a civil war. I don't think the machinery of a civil war nor the money is in place, nor the will.
I think it's not stated directly in the piece, but I think it's understood that the Lebanese army, at least until now, has no interest in any confrontation with Hezbollah. And there's no opposition, let's say, to Hezbollah as it currently exists. In other words, there's no serious talk yet of Hezbollah's disarmament and how the army would operate under those conditions. Is that also a reassurance, if you will, that the only opposition to Hezbollah is more or less standing shoulder to shoulder? They're not trying to change the status quo, at least until now.
Well, yes and no. I mean, of course, everyone is thinking how to change the status quo, but not through violence. And definitely the Lebanese army is not going to declare war on Hezbollah without any kind of a political backing for this kind of move. At least I hope they don't do that, because it will backfire. But I don't think that this is the way the Lebanese army functions. We have to understand that the army has, in one way or another, been collaborating with Hezbollah over the decades, and certainly the last decade and a half or more. So it doesn't mean that the Lebanese army is willing to give look the other way today if there is a political agreement over the south. I think that the army would implement such an agreement. But at the same time, the army is not looking to enter into a civil war with Hezbollah. Definitely not. Yeah. I think that's all I have to say on that.
I don't think civil wars happen as a result of snowballing of different incidents here and there. Part sides to civil war must see that there is a chance of gaining. And none of the candidates for a civil war see a chance of gaining. The biggest one so far was Hezbollah, and for the reasons Michael mentioned, they are curtailed now from doing something like this. Not only their community is destroyed, also their leadership is destroyed.
I always saw civil war as the death knell to Hezbollah, and that's why there's been no civil war.
No, but they specifically said in the past that this was. They said as much.
Right.
You know,
yeah.
That this was sort of this would be an Israeli.
Yeah.
Before the invasion, there was no civil war as well, because no other side opposing Hezbollah could see a chance in winning against Hezbollah. So Hezbollah dictated by the status quo, because they made it clear that nobody can really win against them. Now,
And the army was covering at least the potential for opposition would be destroyed right away.
Yeah.
So there was no serious organizational threat.
yeah, but the army, if the army enters civil war, it will be split as well. So it's not a candidate for civil war. The civil war must be civil, must be by communities, by in the case of Lebanon, it's sects that conduct the civil war, and sects and their allies, as in the case of the PLO or Syria. I think the Lebanese have learned something from the civil war. It didn't go like
This is definitely
yeah,
true.
yeah, and they've learned something. They've learned that it's not an easy thing. Even if you have some shot at it, should not go for it unless you are clear that you're going to win. And if you're so clear, others will not resist you, as in the case of Hezbollah. The show of force they made in May 7th, 2008. They just only has to show the force for others to know what they are facing. And I think because
Can I interject on something? I think also Hezbollah saw in May, and they knew this. They didn't stay very long in western Beirut, and in the mountains they got hit. But I know that in the mountains Hezbollah got hit, but I also know that the Druze and the Druze leadership was not
enthusiastic for it.
they were not happy, because they understood that ultimately the mountain is very vulnerable. As Bashshar was saying, no one today in Lebanon really is arguing for a civil war. And a civil war ultimately needs to be funded. Who is going today to fund a civil war in Lebanon? Already Hezbollah has been weakened by the Israelis. So you would presumably the Arab states would fund the civil war if it means that if you use it to weaken Hezbollah. But today Hezbollah has been weakened.
Yeah. I mean, the dilemma for Lebanon, what to do with something like Hezbollah, is solved by violence, but this time not violence internally, but violence outside. So it leaves the country itself not forced into a civil war internally. As I said, the Lebanese did not learn to let their sectarian allegiances down, nor to love the other side. But they know that if you don't love them, it means you have to have war with them. It's not love and peace; it's peace without love, and that's what they have learned. At least you can have the same thing in Cyprus. There is no love between the sides, but there is peace. Maybe a more stable peace than Lebanon. But at the same time, if you talk to people in Cyprus, they don't like each other on the other side. They think they have different narratives, different stories, and different. The same thing here in Lebanon. Bachir Gemayel is a hero on one side and is a traitor on the other side. But would that mean that they're willing to go into a civil, into a military confrontation? I doubt. Because of that, and because the balance of power doesn't allow that. Neither those who are against Hezbollah are feeling so powerful now that they can go actually impose their will by force, nor Hezbollah after this war feels in a position to do that. So this kind of lack of prospect of making gains in wars, given that all the problems that wars would bring, makes it for me clear that yet to avoid kind of confrontation that will not necessarily lead to war, but will poison the social environment. This is a result that might result from displacement, from frictions in areas that displaced people are in. The army is needed to solve that, as Michael says. And of course, I think not only the army, I think even Hezbollah, or at least those who speak in Hezbollah, are very eager to avoid that. Because the last thing they want to see is a confrontation internally while they're being hit from Israel. And the same thing applies to the other sides. The last thing they want to do now is to enter a civil war when they think they are winning without entering the war themselves. Somebody else is doing their job for them.
Is that how you guys remember the civil war in Lebanon? In other words, what you're describing, Michael, a funded operation, and what you're saying, Bashshar, with a clear path to power. Is that the precondition at this stage?
Look, I think the civil war in Lebanon was many wars, and it became gradually an institutionalized process run by the militias. The same militias, by the way, leaders who inherited the post-war. So it became, ineffectively, the war became a profitable venture for the leadership of the different militias. Of course, it became regionally. It served many purposes, Syria, Israel at various points, the other Arab states. But I think what the Lebanese realized fairly quickly was that the war had become a machine. It was no longer continuing because of the original reason of the war. In 82, for example, the Palestinians left. In other words, in 75, the Maronites had armed because of the Palestinian presence. 7 years later, the Palestinians were gone, but the war continued for another 8 years. A machine had taken shape, and it became this giant series of interests. All the parties had an interest in perpetuating the conflict, and I think many Lebanese realized, and still realize, those of us who lived that war, that essentially there was no reason for this war, no interest in this war, except from a political leadership that was winning financially from this conflict. The war was continuing not because people disagreed or didn't. This is why the Aoun phenomenon is so interesting. It came at a moment when everyone was fed up with the militia rule, which wasn't justified by anything. And he became popular not only in the Christian areas, but he had an echo in the Muslim areas. This is the Aoun at the time, in 1989, 88, 89, 90. But then everything fell apart when he declared war, and he became almost another faction.
So I'm hearing from both of you that the chances of civil strife in an organized fashion is very, very small, at least at this stage. It's interesting to hear that from both of you, because I hear the opposite often, that the conditions are right. But I don't see those conditions myself. I agree with both of you. I don't think a serious return to 1970s like militia against militia is possible.
75 began very differently, I think.
Yeah.
We have to understand that there was an arming before the conflict. People were preparing for war before 75.
Yeah.
I think it also there is a path to victory in the 1975 for the PLO and its allies. The victory could stretch from taking over the whole country or taking over the part of the country. So because the political establishment of the Maronite community was the main power broker in the country, and the PLO and its allies took over, and they reached the limit of that, and they stopped there. And the Lebanese, the Kataib and their allies at the time also realized that this is the limit of what they can get. And then at some point there was, at least for the Lebanese forces under Samir Ja'ja, there was an understanding that we don't want the others, we don't want more. Unlike Bachir Gemayel and Aoun. Bachir Gemayel and Aoun were kind of way they want to liberate the other side, either from the Palestinians or from the Syrians. Samir Ja'ja realized that those people don't want to be liberated by us because they scared of us more than they scared of the Palestinians and the Syrians. And therefore they said, أمن المجتمع المسيحي فوق كل اعتبار. The Christian, the security of the Christian society is above all considerations. And they basically wanted to sort of have de facto split. And it wasn't because they realized this is the limit of that project.
Look, all the communities in Lebanon have, at one time or another, allied with foreign actors to impose their dominance domestically. The Sunnis and the Druze tried this in 75, 76. What was the consequence of this? They moved, as Bashshar was saying, they had moved significantly. They threatened to take the Christian areas. What happened? The Syrians came in and essentially took both communities, the Sunnis and the Druze, and completely dominated them. In 77, they assassinated Kemal Jumblat. And the Sunni community was basically under the thumb of the Syrians until they left in 2005.
Yeah.
Okay, Rafi al-Hariri was brought in, but still, one of the problems is that Rafi al-Hariri was trying to break out of this. The Maronite community allied itself with the Israelis in 1982 to bring Bachir Gemayel to power. Again, allying with an outside power to impose your hegemony domestically. And we know the price that the Maronites paid, and that they're still paying to this day, because it led to a series of developments. They haven't recovered from that. Demographically, the community has gone down because of the conflicts that followed 1982. Today, the Shia community is facing a similar situation. They've allied themselves with the Iranians to dominate, and we see what's happening today. This tragedy of, over 1 million people, their lives destroyed. I mean, we have to understand it's not just a question that their lives, their social structure is being destroyed. The institutions are being destroyed. This is going to take decades for them to reconstruct. Decades. And so all the communities, just to conclude on this side, each of the communities at one time, I'm not speaking today, whether it's the Maronites or the Sunnis or the Druze, all came back in one way or another to the state. Now, within a sectarian context. But they came back to the state. They understood that, in a way, if you stay outside the state, where does this take you? And, this is why today you still find that these are the communities talking in the name of the state, with many contradictions. But still.
Just to add one thing to Michael. Now, there is no sponsor of a new sect. The Israelis have learned from the experience maybe a few decades ago that they don't want to sponsor a Lebanese side. They want just to do their own job and leave it to them. So it's not like it's now back to the turn of the Christians to be sponsored by the Israelis. There's no sponsorship now. There's only fight against the dominant one and the sponsor of the dominant one, which is Iran, and leave the country as it is. And this is why you might have a new balance that is not going to be achieved through years of war, as in the case of the Civil War, where you draw lines. It will be established by the perceptions of equal powers and by the experience of the Civil War. They have learned something from.
Yeah, but this is, by the way, this is the optimistic view, but this is maybe how you forge a nation, in a way.
I'll add one last thing also, talking about these figures that have all been killed. And we talked about it already. The Syrian regime faces opposition from Kemal Jumblat and Bachir Gemayel, and later Rafi Hariri as well. But these are politicians assassinated by the local sponsor. And you go even further, Hassan Nasrallah, even though he's killed by the Israelis, I think there's a feeling of being really let down by Iran, which maybe translates a bit into that the sponsor is doing the wrong thing. And maybe that does help in what you're saying, and that these alliances don't get you far.
Look, at the end of the day, what we realize to our horror, is that Lebanon is not a country which seems ever to manage its own problems. It always wants outsiders to come and resolve the problems, and it's still here. This tendency is still here. If you look at the political class today, what did we have? What country has an economic collapse, a financial collapse that we had in 2019, 2020, and does nothing about it? This is a political class that is incapable of resolving problems. It has not resolved a problem since 2005. It pushes problems away. So, okay, it's a good thing to stop relying on the outsiders in terms of our internal wars, but we haven't stopped relying on outsiders to resolve other problems, and we haven't taken it upon ourselves as Lebanese to resolve our own problems. We're still in a structure that remains and that was created during the Civil War. This is the leadership that is in power today. And they're running the country in the same way as they ran the country during the Civil War. They divided the cake between themselves, and they protected themselves by playing on sectarian sensibilities. Sectarianism won't go away, but this political class is not eternal.
Thanks to everyone listening and watching. And before we go, please don't forget to like, subscribe to the YouTube channel, leave a comment, engage as much as you can. And also, if you prefer listening on your preferred podcast platform, rate and review the channel. We'll be back soon for another discussion of Point Counterpoint. Until then, take care.